أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين نحمدك يا ربي على نعمتك وإن تعدوا نعمة الله لا تحصوها وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله هو أهل التقوى وأهل المغفرة وأشهد أن سيدنا وحبيبنا محمدا صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم عبده ورسوله بلغ الرسالة وأدى الأمانة ونصح الأمة ونحن على ذلك من الشاهدين. Amma ba'd, dear brothers, dear sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is the first Jumu'ah in the month of Ramadan. May Allah accept from us all of our efforts and endeavors that are dedicated to Him during this first Jumu'ah in Ramadan and during the whole month of Ramadan and during the whole year after Ramadan. Let our lives be dedicated to He who will accept from us our sincerity and our fidelity. Dear brothers, dear sisters, this week I have a roaming thought in my head that tells me some of you would like to listen maybe to some information pertaining to this month of virtue and devotion. And I don't know, I bounced the idea around in my head, and my conclusion was I will continue with these explanations pertaining to Surah Al-Isra as we are passing through times and through occurrences that have a direct relationship to these revealing meanings in Surah Al-Isra. So the last time around we were trying to explain فَإِذَا جَاءَ وَعْدُ الْآخِرَةِ لِيَسُوءُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ وَلِيَدْخُلُوا الْمَسْجِدَ كَمَا دَخَلُوهُ أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ وَلِيُتَبِّرُوا مَا عَلَوْا تَتْبِيرًا. We explained that عِبَادًا لَنَا, a description and a definition that we have long lost. We, the Muslims, have descended, have gone down from that status of ibadan lana to becoming more or less traditional, nominal, ritualistic Muslims hoping and praying for Allah's mercy and acceptance, with our verbiage racing ahead of us and our efforts and labor lagging significantly behind. Ibadan lana are those whose sincere and dedicated efforts for Allah are ahead of their talk, of their presentations and lectures and these types of things that we have grown accustomed to, and from which we continue to rotate in vicious circles, year after year, generation after generation. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, وَلِيَدْخُلُوا الْمَسْجِدَ كَمَا دَخَلُوهُ أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ. عِبَادًا لَنَا will enter the masjid as they did the first time. And the first time was during the Khilafah of Umar ibn al-Khattab. That's when عِبَادًا لَنَا entered al-Masjid al-Aqsa. So please pay attention, because the problem of Muslims nowadays, we are all part of the problem. Our problem is we have Islamic scholars, between quotation marks, who understand the past but cannot link the past with the present. We have other conversationists, other pundits, other analysts who understand today's world but cannot understand the first chapters of Islamic history. And so we are living in a type of schism. Rarely will you find a person who is well versed and anchored in the first lessons of that Islamic generation, the generation of the Prophet and the generation after the Prophet, on an equal par with understanding what is happening in today's world. This is the type of schism that we are living. And yours truly here is trying to bridge the gap, to make past events meaningful in today's world, and to understand the developments of today's world in the context of the Quranic and prophetic past. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and His word is the everlasting truth, وَلِيَدْخُلُوا الْمَسْجِدَ كَمَا دَخَلُوهُ أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ, and they, عِبَادًا لَنَا, that means we still need a qualitative improvement on ourselves today to recapture that rank of عِبَادًا لَنَا. Once we do recapture that rank and that high human achievement, Allah subhanahu is saying, وَلِيَدْخُلُوا الْمَسْجِدَ كَمَا دَخَلُوهُ أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ. Let us put our hands in the hands of the majority of Mufassirin and say that Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa is going to be re-entered by عِبَادًا لَنَا the same way it was entered the first time. The first time Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa was entered, there was a background to that. The world at that time was the world pertinent to this region of our planet, the Holy Land region, witnessed the power block of the Byzantines, the power structure in Persia, the power presence of Bani Israel in Arabia and in Byzantium, and then the newly emerging Islamic power. When we read these ayat, we have to integrate into our thought and understanding the presence of these four powers. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, وَلِيَدْخُلُوا الْمَسْجِدَ كَمَا دَخَلُوهُ أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ. Ibadan lana are going to make an entry into Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa the same way they made that entry previously. Previously was about 14 centuries ago. And how did Ibadan lana, the Prophet and the prophetic generation, how did they enter Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa? They entered Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa after they entered Al-Masjid Al-Haram. Jerusalem, Al-Quds, was liberated after the liberation of Mecca. Al-Quds was liberated after the liberation of Khaybar. So, if we are going to become once again Ibadan lana, this ayah is telling us that we will go into Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa in the same way we did it the first time. Now the question is here, I pose this question because the public Muslim mind still has not made up its mind as how to categorize those who rule by force Mecca and Al-Medina and Khaybar and the Arabian Peninsula. Are they the extension of the prophetic generation? Let me be more specific to help you out. The king of Saudi Arabia and the crown prince of Saudi Arabia and their ministers and minions, can you say that they belong to the prophetic generation? Can you include them in Ibadan lana, the way we defined Ibadan lana in the previous presentations? Can you include them in that category? If you can, if somehow the information you have, and regrettably the information that the average Muslim has is not fertilized with the facts of the day. So some average Muslim wouldn't argue the point. Yeah, these are the custodians of the two harams in Mecca and Medina, and they, have budgets that they give some Islamic centers and Islamic organizations around the world. Today, less than the case was in the past 20 or 30 years, but still, they have a fluidity of cash, they have a surplus of funds. And so, some Muslims would say, yeah, they can be categorized as Ibadan lana. I hope this type of thinking is on its way out, and we can wake up to the real world, and we can see, not in the ritualistic sense, but in the functional, the active, and the relevant sense that those who are ruling in Arabia are closer to those who are ruling in today's Byzantium, i.e. the US and Europe, and closer to those who are ruling in colonized Palestine. They are closer to them, the rulers of Arabia are closer to the Zionists and imperialists than they are to you and me, the average Muslim. Can we get this straight? Can this finally sink in and we can understand who is with us and who is against us? So if we can enhance our understanding of these forces, then we will easily draw a parallel between the mushriks of Arabia, who were the enemies of the ibadan lana. Therefore, ibadan lana had to liberate Mecca. If we can settle on this fact, then we're going to have to understand that Al-Masjid al-Haram and Mecca, as well as Al-Medina and Al-Hijaz and Khaybar, these places have to be liberated on the way to liberating Al-Quds. They go hand in hand. They are like white on rice. وَلِيَدْخُلُوا الْمَسْجِدَ كَمَا دَخَلُوهُ أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ. Now, if we look at today's world, we have a bug that acts like a pathogen in the hearts and minds of many Muslims. And this is the sectarian bug. Because the liberation of Al-Quds was followed by the tragedy of Karbala. All of this belongs in one sequence. We have to see this as a continuum. The problem with those who have inherited their Sunnism is they can identify the liberation of Mecca in the time of the Prophet. They can identify the liberation of Khaybar in the time of the Prophet. They can identify the liberation of Al-Quds in the time of Al-Khalifa Umar ibn al-Khattab. But they cannot make that leap of faith to identify Karbala as a continuation of these liberations, but as a reaction from the internal enemies in the Muslim realm, in conjunction with Bani Israel, who had lost all of their battles in Arabia and northward, in conjunction with Byzantium. That's a problem there with the Sunnis. The problem with the Shi'is is they concentrate on Karbala as if Karbala had no beginnings to it. They cannot see that the liberation of Mecca and the liberation of Khaybar and the liberation of Al-Quds, all of that resulted in the unity of purpose of Bani Umayyah and Bani Israel and Bani al-Asfar. In today's terminology, the Arab proxy, the Arabian ruling proxies, along with the Zionists and the Israelis. And this is the gap that we have in our mind. Some traditional Shi'is and traditional Sunnis. They speak about issues that we are allowed to have our different opinions about, but we are not allowed to have a different opinion about the ganging up of our internal and external enemies against us when we are in pursuit of Islamic self-determination. And in today's world, you can add to this crowd, you take India, take China, take Russia, all of these. When we are weak, they gang up against us. And that's what's happening in today's world. But you can't gang up against ibadan lana. Ibadan lana don't fight like heroes. Heroes fight like ibadan lana. Anyways, in the ayah, وَلِيَدْخُلُوا الْمَسْجِدَ كَمَا دَخَلُوهُ أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ. That's why we see in today's world, you can go to presentations, you can listen to any scholar you want. I feel quite certain that what I have just explained to you will not be explained by others, because there is a disease in the Muslim in the Muslim mind that is looking at its history, and that has to do with sectarianism. First of all, to show you how forgotten these details of history are, even though those who label themselves as Sunni Muslims, ask them, on what day was Mecca liberated? You can ask a Sunni or a Shi'i. On what day in the calendar was Mecca liberated? On what day in the calendar was Khaybar liberated? On what day in the calendar was Al-Quds liberated? And the answer from everyone, Shi'i or Sunni, is going to be someone scratching their head, and maybe someone in a multitudinous crowd will come up with the answer. One person from thousands of persons in which these very significant events that are included in this ayah are sort of swept under the carpet somehow. I don't know. We don't know. Many Muslims, though, you tell them, when was Al-Imam Al-Hussein martyred? And they will tell you the 10th of Al-Muharram. Everyone knows that, whether he's a Sunni or a Shi'i, with their different take on the issue, but everyone knows the date. But how come everyone knows that one particular day, but is unable to relate it to the preceding 3 other important days in the year that led up to Karbala? This is something that you have to ponder yourself. Why can't we the Muslims in the world, why can't we have conferences about Bani Israel in Al-Madinah? Banu Israel now are going to Al-Madinah. They are going as journalists, they're going as tourists, they're going as clergymen, theologians, they're going as diplomats, maybe undercover, whatever. But all of these things are happening on our watch, right now, today. And if Muslims, and remember, in Medina there was Banu Qaynuqa, Banu Nadir, and Banu Qurayza. If Muslims wanted to organize a conference about Bani Israel, and in particular about these 3 power centers of Bani Israel in Al-Madinah, when the Prophet was in Al-Madinah, it's off limits. You can't do that. We can't do that. We can't speak about Bani Israel in Al-Madinah. We can't has anyone ever seen a picture of Khaybar? Do we know what it looks like? No. Maybe 1 in a million may have seen it. Does anyone include going to Khaybar when they go to Hajj or Umrah? We have many Islamic organizations in the world, associations, organizations, parties, movements. Why can't they agree upon among themselves to have a conference about Bani Israel in Khaybar? Of course, Al-Quds is another issue because that is under, right now, direct Israeli colonizing power. Mecca, Al-Madinah, and Khaybar are under the same colonizing policy, except those who are executing it, they have Islamic rituals. This is a problem that we are going to have to come to terms with. In today's world, many of you are aware, I hope, of a type of rapprochement, if you will, between Riyadh and Tehran, between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Islamic Republic of Iran. Many people have many ways of looking at this. Some Muslims are delighted that both sides are burying the hatchet and making amends and hopefully consolidating their plans for the future. It's still too early to pass judgment on this, but it's not too early to understand what the ayah is telling us. وَلِيَدْخُلُوا الْمَسْجِدَ كَمَا دَخَلُوهُ أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ. Did we enter Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa the first time around when the enemies of the Muslims were in control of Mecca and Medina and Khaybar? When the Prophet, may Allah's peace and blessings be upon him and his, when he went to Al-Madinah, he was forced out of Mecca. There was a conspiracy to assassinate him while he was sleeping in his home in Mecca. He left and he entered into, when he arrived in Yathrib, after his arrival, Yathrib was named Madinat al-Rasul. The two words Madinat al-Rasul were compacted into one word, Al-Madinah. When the Prophet arrived in Al-Madinah, he entered into an agreement with Bani Israel who were living in Al-Madinah. And they were living in Al-Madinah because they had information that they would not disclose, obviously. They had information that a prophet will appear in that vicinity. They didn't know exactly where, but they knew the prophet was, there's going to be a prophet who is going to make his presence known in that part of Arabia. They used to brag to the mushriks of Arabia, to the Arabians, before the prophet came, that they have knowledge that there's going to be a prophet. Of course, they claim that that prophet's going to be one of them. فَلَمَّا جَاءَهُمْ مَا عَرَفُوا كَفَرُوا بِهِ. When the Prophet came with the knowledge that they knew about him, they rejected him. So the Prophet, knowing all of this, entered into an agreement with Bani Israel. And the Prophet and the committed Muslims with him, they honored their part of the agreement. But Banu Israel, with their three factions, Banu Qaynuqa, Banu Nadir, and Banu Qurayza, they did not honor their part of the agreement. There's more to it than this, of course, and we will pick up, insha'Allah, with Allah's help, next week. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. وَقُلْ رَبِّي زِدْنِي عِلْمًا. وصلى الله على محمد وآل محمد. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.